America's top generals drew up a plan to attack their own people and blame it on Cuba. They wrote it down, they signed it, and it is a real declassified document. It was called Operation Northwoods. Before you hear a word of what it proposed, hear this first. Not one part of this plan was ever carried out. The shock is not that it happened. The shock is that the most senior military officers in the United States put their names to it at all. To understand how it came to this, you have to go back 1 year. In April of 1961, a CIA-trained army of Cuban exiles landed at the Bay of Pigs and was crushed in 72 hours. 1,200 men were captured, and the American hand behind the invasion was exposed for the whole world to see. It was the worst humiliation of Kennedy's presidency, and it did not make him let go of Cuba. It made him obsessed with it.
Our sympathy goes out to the people of Cuba, now suffering under the yoke of a dictator.
To Washington, a communist state 90 miles from Florida, was intolerable, and now it had beaten the United States in front of the world. Getting rid of Castro became, in the words of the men involved, the top priority of the entire government. So behind closed doors, the president handed the problem to the one person he trusted most. His brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, took personal charge of a new campaign to bring Castro down. He told the men running it that Cuba was now the top priority of the entire United States government, and that everything else came second. They gave it a code name, Operation Mongoose, a secret war of sabotage run out of the Pentagon by a general named Edward Lansdale. It was authorized in November of 1961. The goal was to make Cuba ungovernable. Its agents would blow up refineries and power plants and wreck the sugar harvest. They would contaminate shipments and slip armed exile teams onto the island to stir a revolt. Lansdale laid it all out in 6 escalating phases, building toward one goal: an open uprising that would topple Castro's government by October of 1962. It was one of the largest covert operations the CIA had ever run. Hundreds of officers, thousands of Cuban agents, a secret navy of small boats. And running alongside it was something darker still. The CIA was also trying to kill Fidel Castro. A Senate committee would later document at least 8 separate plots against his life. Poison pills, lead cigars laced with toxin, a contaminated diving suit, and a contract handed to the American mafia. None of them worked, but the intent behind them was real. But sabotage and assassination might not be enough to topple Castro, and if they weren't, the men in the Pentagon wanted to be ready for the other option, a full American invasion. There was just one problem: an invasion needed a reason the world would accept. The pressure for that reason came from inside the secret war itself. The office running Operation Mongoose asked the military to draw up justifications, pretexts that could trigger an American invasion. And in March of 1962, the Joint Chiefs of Staff answered that request. They drew up a memorandum for the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara. Its subject line was blunt: justification for US military intervention in Cuba. And it was signed by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs himself, the highest ranking officer in the United States military. His name was General Lyman Lemnitzer. The idea behind it was simple, and it was monstrous. If the United States wanted to invade Cuba, it needed the world to believe Cuba had struck first, so the chiefs would manufacture the provocation themselves. What the document proposed, in plain typewritten English, is hard to believe a government wrote down. They proposed staging attacks on America's own naval base at Guantánamo, fake riots, fake saboteurs, and blowing up an American ship in the harbour to be blamed on Cuba. A new version of the explosion that once dragged America into war with Spain. They proposed a campaign of terror against Cuban refugees on American soil. The memo suggested they could sink a boat full of Cubans fleeing to Florida, and then it added, in brackets, 3 words: real or simulated. They proposed wounding Cuban refugees in the United States in ways that could be widely publicised. And in the coldest passage of all, the chiefs wrote that casualty lists in American newspapers would cause, their words, a helpful wave of national indignation. There was more. Plan to fake a Cuban fighter shooting down a civilian airliner. A real passenger plane would take off full of people boarding under false names. Out of sight, it would be swapped for an identical pilotless drone. The drone would fly on, broadcast a distress call blaming a Cuban jet, and then destroy itself over the sea. And the real plane, with its passengers, would simply land in secret and disappear. They even proposed flying American jets disguised as Soviet-built MiGs to harass civilian airliners and shipping and manufacture the impression of Cuban aggression. Read the memo today, and one thing becomes clear. This was not the raving of a single crank officer. It was a considered, staffed, and signed proposal from the collective leadership of the American Armed Forces. The memo went up the chain to Secretary McNamara, and there it stopped. The Kennedy administration rejected Operation Northwoods. It was never approved, and it was never carried out. Say that part twice, because it matters. Nobody sank a boat, and nobody bombed a ship. No airliner was ever faked. The plan died on a desk. McNamara and the Kennedy White House wanted nothing to do with it. The civilians, in the end, refused to let the generals manufacture a war. And that is the thin, uncomfortable line this whole story rests on. Northwoods was stopped, not because such a plan was unthinkable to the men who wrote it, but because the people above them said no. But there is a quieter fact in the paperwork that is almost as chilling as the plan. Buried in the memo, the chiefs set themselves one limit. All of this, they wrote, was only worth doing as long as it would not drag the Soviet Union directly into a war over Cuba. They had no idea how close that already was. Within months, General Lemnitzer's term as chairman ended, and he was not reappointed. He was sent across the Atlantic to command NATO. The document he had signed was locked away, and it would stay secret for 35 years. We only know about Operation Northwoods at all because of an accident of history. When the government opened its files on the Kennedy assassination in the 1990s, the memo came out with them. An author named James Bamford found it and put it before the public in a book called Body of Secret, and the reaction was disbelief that the men at the very top of the American military had ever put such a thing on paper. But there it was, in black and white with a signature at the bottom. For a year and a half, the United States had thrown everything it had at Cuba. There had been an invasion and a secret war of sabotage. There had been plots to kill its leader and a written plan to fake an attack and invade for real. From 90 miles away, Fidel Castro could feel all of it closing in. He was certain another invasion was coming, a real one this time, with American soldiers, and so were his new friends in Moscow. Watching the sabotage, the assassination plots, and the constant drumbeat of invasion, the Soviet Union reached a conclusion. If it wanted to keep Cuba, it would have to defend it with something the United States could not ignore, and it had another reason of its own. The Americans had already ringed the Soviet Union with nuclear missiles, including some right across its border in Turkey. Cuba was a chance to point the same gun back. So, even as America's generals schemed to invent a reason for war, they had already run out of time. Soviet ships were at sea, their holds hiding nuclear missiles, bound for the island, 90 miles from Florida. The Joint Chiefs had wanted an excuse to go to war over Cuba. Within months, they will get a crisis far more dangerous than any excuse they could have invented.